Okay, and I am going to start here. Hi, my name's Chuck Fall, and my guest today is Blair Bobier, the founder and board member of Oregon Ranked Choice Voting. We are exploring a green perspectives uh, theme today for discussion, and I'm going to go straight to Blair. Blair, you are a ranked choice voting expert. You're a Green Party activist. You've been advancing electoral reform for a number of years. And so I'm going to go straight into the highlight is there is a pending bill in Oregon in the legislature under HB 2004. Blair, before we get into the nuts and bolts of that bill, give us a quick background on your history as an activist in the Green Party and what's brought you into becoming a chief proponent for ranked choice voting. Blair, go ahead.
Well, thanks, Chuck. So I've been involved with the Green Party since some point in, I guess, the mid 1980s. I'm one of the folks that founded the Pacific Party, which is what we called Oregon's Green Party back then. At the time, we evolved into the Pacific Green Party. I was the chief petitioner that put us on the ballot the first time and ran for governor under the Green Party banner back in 1988. I've been a proponent of election reform since about that same time. I've been advocating for proportional representation, increased ballot access, and pretty consistently for ranked choice voting, which used to be called instant runoff voting. And I've supported these different methods because they're just more sensible, more fair, more democratic ways to vote. They get us a better, more reflective democracy that represents the diversity of people in this country. And yes, they can also provide a big boost to smaller parties, so-called third parties, as we see all throughout Europe and Latin America, places that use proportional representation and also ranked choice voting.
So just in a nutshell, what is ranked choice voting? How does it happen? How will it theoretically impact the primary season and or not have a primary season? Does that get passed on? So what are the nuts and bolts of a ranked choice voting? What's that going to look like in the ballot?
Sure. So let's look at the types of voting and elections that are out there now. So what we use mostly in this country is called winner take all. In Oregon in particular, in a lot of places, it's actually plurality voting, which means that in order to win, a candidate just needs more votes than anyone else in the race. Now, at first blush, that seems like that makes sense, but it really doesn't, because if you have any more than two candidates, plurality starts making a lot less sense pretty quickly. So, for example, let's say there's a three-way race. One candidate gets 40% of the vote, and two candidates get 30% of the vote. Well, the candidate who's got 40% of the vote under plurality is going to win, even though 60% of the people voted for someone else. So a couple of different ways to get around that. One is to have a majority vote requirement, and that can be done by either having two elections, so two rounds, an election and a runoff, or you can combine that into one election, which is basically what ranked choice voting does, and you have an instant runoff. So with ranked choice voting, instead of just voting for one candidate, voters rank the candidates by order of preference, your first choice, your second choice, and your third choice. Because a majority is required, if one candidate gets a majority of the first choice votes, that candidate wins. They get 50% plus one, election's over. If no one gets a majority in that first round, then you drop out the candidate with the fewest first choice votes, and whoever voted for the defeated candidate, their votes then count towards their second choice. So this is a way to eliminate the spoiler effect. You can vote for whoever you want. That can be your first choice. And if that candidate really doesn't have a good shot at getting into office, then you can have your backup vote count. And that way you don't split votes. It empowers candidates from a variety of different communities that might not get a shot otherwise. And third parties can get a chance to get into the debate and potentially win office.
So it's an interesting distinction that the plurality voting does in effect allow a minority who doesn't get the majority to in effect win an election. I know famously Abraham Lincoln did not get a majority, and there was, I think it was a three-way race or something, and he got 30 some odd percent of the vote and went on to become a very famous president. So yeah.
Conversely, we've also had Bill Clinton win with less than a majority, George W. Bush win with less than a majority, and Donald Trump winning election while actually losing the popular vote.
Okay, so this is I get it. So there is a result that whoever does get elected through a ranked choice method will, through the bumping of the voting, it will be a majoritarian selection in effect. And this gets quickly processed without a secondary runoff race. That's in a sense precluded or obviated, right?
Yes. Yeah. And you can see that there's still places like Georgia, for example, where we've seen runoff elections happen. And some places do the first round, say Oregon, for municipal elections, will do a first round election in May. And if no one gets a majority, then the top two candidates will go on to November. And other places, like I was saying, Georgia has their election in November. And if no one gets a majority, then there's a December runoff. Now, there's a lot of time and expense involved with having two separate elections. Plus, not as many people show up for the second election. So you get a real drop off, you get a different electorate, and it's just an inferior way to do it when you can have one election, preferably in November, where voter turnout is the highest and you get the most participation.
So if the rank, well, let's go, we're going to talk about the legislation that's pending or the referral. Already some cities in Oregon are using a ranked choice voting technique. Is that correct?
So at this point, one county and one city use it, and two others have adopted it. So Benton was the first county to adopt it back in 2016, used it for the first time in 2020. Corvallis, which is within Benton County, adopted it afterwards and has already used it. Portland and Multnomah County have both adopted it. Portland will be using it for the first time this upcoming November. And then 2 years after that, Multnomah County will follow suit.
Okay, but also other nations already use the ranked choice voting. I believe Australia, Ireland, and I know other cities in this country. How are other countries using ranked choice voting?
So Australia's been using it for like 100 years at a variety of different levels. Ireland uses it to elect their president. The proportional version of ranked choice voting is also used in different places, like Scotland, for example. But at this point, it's also fairly widespread in the US. Maine and Alaska use it statewide. A number of states in the South use ranked choice voting for military and overseas ballots because there isn't enough time to send a ballot to some overseas military base, get that processed, get it mailed back to the states, processed, and then another ballot sent out for a runoff. So a number of states, I think maybe up to 11 in the South, use ranked choice voting for those types of elections. New York City adopted it a handful of years ago. San Francisco's been using ranked choice voting since 2004. It's used in a number of other cities in the San Francisco Bay Area. So it's getting a lot more widespread. It's the fastest growing election reform in the country.
Okay, so it is taking off. It is being used. What's the consequence of the culture of the race, of the political race, that there has actually been a criticism that politics gets watered down in order to appeal to that center. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
What do you say about that? What effect does it have on the nature of the political race itself and the campaigns?
So For ranked choice voting elections, I think one of the more marked improvements is it improves the tenor and civility of campaigns. If you have just a typical majority plurality winner take all election and two candidates are going head to head, the scorched earth tactic is very often what's used. You want to trash your opponent. If you drive the voter turnout down, that's fine. People are turned off by negative elections. If you destroy your opponent, that's fine because all you need is a plurality to win. But it's a different situation with ranked choice voting because you do have to reach out broadly and you might need the second choice votes from your opponents, from your opponent's supporters. So rather than trashing your opponent, what you want to do is point out the similarities and say, hey, I disagree with your candidate on these issues, but this is where we actually align. So if you can't give me your first choice vote, how about giving me your second choice vote? Because our values are in greater alignment than those other candidates. And we've seen this in the San Francisco Bay Area where candidates actually even campaign together who are opposing each other. Different organizations will endorse slates of candidates and say, this is our first choice, this is our second choice, this is our third choice. And newspaper editorials will also do the same thing. They'll list the candidates in order of preference. So it actually promotes cooperation. Candidates are forced to go beyond their base, but it doesn't mean they water things down because you can be really clear in your positions and people can take it or leave it. If they don't like what you have to say, well, there's several other choices on the ballot.
Good points. Okay, so it's coming. Ranked choice voting in Oregon. There is a House Bill 2004. Give us some background on 2004. What its kind of history is. It didn't come out of nothing. People represented it, advanced it. I believe it's a referendum. Give us some background on it and just unpack it for us. What does House Bill 2004 aim to accomplish?
So House Bill 2004 is a legislative referral. It passed both houses of the Oregon legislature somewhat dramatically on the last day of the session. And that means that it goes straight to the ballot. It will be on the November 2024 ballot. And if passed, it will establish ranked choice voting elections for all statewide offices in Oregon. So governor, secretary of state, attorney general, treasurer, and commissioner of the Bureau of Labor and Industries. And it will also affect federal offices, president, senator, Congress, in both major party primaries and in the general election. So starting the implementation of it, if it passes in 2024, will be 2028 because we wanted to give the state and the county clerks time to make sure that their systems were compatible with processing ranked choice ballots. And also the state and the Secretary of State Department of Elections was really concerned that there be a comprehensive educational component to the rollout. So it's a very simple system, but it's a different one. So people just have to be notified that when they use their ballots, they're going to be ranking their choices 1, 2, 3, rather than just marking a box for one candidate or the other. And this bill came out of a very broad statewide coalition of a real diversity of groups. And if people go to our website, OregonRCV.org, they'll be able to see the different groups that are part of this coalition. Groups ranging from the Urban League of Portland to the Rural Organizing Project, the Latino Network, Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon, Next Up, which is a group oriented towards youth advocacy, League of Women Voters, the Pacific Green Party, Progressive Party. So there's really a diverse and broad coalition that brought this bill forward. We were very fortunate to have the support of the Speaker of the House, Dan Rayfield, and Dan and I were the two chief petitioners for the original Benton County measure back in 2016. And our hope, quite honestly, at the time was that Benton County would serve as kind of a laboratory for a statewide effort. And I think that things have really grown. We can talk about Portland, which has adopted a proportional type of ranked choice voting. And I'd like to think that what we did in Benton County helped influence that Portland effort. So the Portland victory is a huge one. It's a major step forward. And when Portland starts using it in Benton County, that's a pretty significant part of the electorate in Oregon that's already using some form of ranked choice elections.
Absolutely. And we'll loop back and talk about Portland. So there was a request for submissions for hearing on 2004, on the HB 2004. What hearing has to occur? You just explained that it's a referral and that we can expect to be, we the people will vote on a referral to a ballot initiative or a ballot referral, a referendum from the House or the Senate. They're sending it to the people to vote directly. Our elected representatives are not going to determine this for us. We, the people, have to go to the ballot box and vote. What is there anything legislatively speaking that has to be done, or is it just in a holding position waiting till November?
Essentially, yes. I mean, it's made it through the legislature. It's passed. All the hearings and work sessions are done, and we'll vote on it in November. It's that the legislative part of the process is done, and you're correct. It is up to we, the people, to take it from here.
Are you doing? Is your organization doing advocacy work? Are you promoting it? Are you going to be advertising? Are you concerned that there's going to be an attack on this? What are you anticipating in terms of marketing this to the people?
So we will continue to work with the statewide coalition that came together to get the bill passed. We'll be part of that coalition. The coalition is in the process of putting together a campaign committee. So we'll be part of that process. We've basically served as kind of the policy experts providing support to the greater coalition. So there will be a campaign organization that will form, and under Oregon law, we'll have to create a PAC to support that ballot measure. And of course, we're always concerned about some form of opposition coming from somewhere. We'd like to look more positively at the broad support that it has. And we as individuals will be working with that campaign to make as powerful a coalition as possible and to get as many people to support the campaign and get this sucker passed at the ballot box.
Okay, so it's the struggle is still on. It's an advertising, marketing, public relations, education to tell people what's coming down the pike and what they get to vote on and why it's important to support this. What's going to happen? Let's assume it passes. Who's going to be responsible for the educating the public on how to use this in that time period between 2024 and when it finally becomes functional throughout the state in 2028? Is that the elections division, or is the coalition going to be responsible? How is that going to unfold?
So in the measure itself, it empowers and authorizes the Secretary of State with doing a broad, community-based, culturally sensitive education campaign that's conducted in English and the 5 languages that are most commonly spoken in Oregon in addition to English. So it's really pretty well specified as to how that's going to take place. The details of that are up to the Secretary of State, and the Secretary should work in conjunction with 36 county clerks around the state. And we've got great models for how education can happen. Benton County did a fantastic job. Other places, the Bay Area, New Mexico, a number of other places that have made the transition have also done this. So we can expect to see things like flyers and community forums spots on television and on the internet. And yes, the coalition is going to be very active in reaching out to its various constituencies to make sure that people understand that the change is coming and how to use it and how to use it effectively.
Okay, so by 2028, assuming it passes 2024, November coming up, the people pass it, there'll be the 3 years of education, getting the counties coordinated. So come 2028, the first full deployment of this ranked choice voting should go on flawlessly, given the amount of time they're going to have.
I would certainly hope so. And again, by that point, we will have had years of experience between Benton County, Corvallis, Portland, and Multnomah County, which will come online, and very possibly other municipalities between now and then.
Okay, let's talk about Portland then, because Portland just turned their state government, their city government, from being a 4 at-large council members. They've created 4 districts. Each district will have 3 elected representatives that will be elected through a ranked choice voting process. And so let's talk about Portland. So come 2028, Portland will have been quite experienced using this method. And what distinguishes the Portland ranked choice method that is notable?
So the Portland method will elect multiple candidates at the same time. The statewide method that's going to be used statewide, as well as for federal elections, just affects one office at a time, one office holder. So when you vote for governor, secretary of state, there's only one person who holds that office at a time. But as you pointed out, Portland is moving to what we would call multi-member districts, which is kind of a mouthful, and it just means there's a number of city council people, each representing the same district. And the idea behind that is you get as broad-based representation as possible. Everybody, as close to everybody as sort of humanly possible under the circumstances, will have some form of representation, because when you get 3 people from each district, there's a whole lot more opportunity for people to be represented. So the threshold, as it were, to elect someone for the city council races will be 25% plus 1, basically. So you can call it 26%. As we talked about before, there's a majority requirement in some places. Other times it's just a plurality, more votes than anyone else. Ranked choice voting for a single office, you want to get a majority of people, which is a wonderful alternative when the choice is not having majority representation. You'd rather have majority representation. The Portland system takes it one step further and tries to ensure that the representation is as broad as possible. So it's really a pretty enlightened method and very progressive.
Well, okay, that's interesting. So each district is going to have 3 representatives. 8 people might jump in the race. Only 3 of those are going to be selected. And there's still going to be a churning of voting in the same ranked choice. In other words, if my first choice doesn't measure up, then it bumps to this. I go through so let's just, if there's 8 people, am I voting for 8 of them, or do I only get 3 votes to cast on that body of that option of 8? You catch my drift?
I do. And I have to say, one of those somewhat embarrassing and honest answers is I'm not exactly sure at the moment, because each jurisdiction can decide how many options people get to rank. And I'm not sure at the moment what the Portland limit is. I think they might have wound up with 5. And that's really just based on limitations of software technology, and then just actually very practical considerations, such as the size of the ballot and how easy it is to process. So some places you can have unlimited choices. If you've got 20 candidates, you get 20 choices. And other places can limit it to 3 or 5 or 7. So I will have to look that up, Chuck,
Well,
and
that's
get you an answer.
didn't mean to stick you with something like that. No,
I should know that.
it's all new. But
Yes.
let's just say if there's 8 people and our ballot says you can basically rank 5 of them,
Right.
however, only 3 are going to be selected. Basically, there's going to be machine counting, if it's a word, software process that turns it. But in the end, you to qualify, you absolutely have to get 25% plus 1, which is not majoritarian. It's proportional. So you could have end up with quite a diversity in each district, among the 3. I mean, it's who knows what, but that's an interesting point.
Yeah,
Uh,
and that's the idea. You hit the nail on the head. It you will wind up with that diversity, and it just should make for a broader, more diverse, more interesting council with greater representation from each community. And now that we're moving to districts as well, places like East Portland that has traditionally been ignored will have much greater representation from the get-go.
Very, very interesting, exciting times for electoral reforms. What do you anticipate you doing yourself after ranked choice voting becomes the law of the land? Do you have other electoral reforms you think are important, or are you going to take a break and go to Hawaii and rest yourself there?
I'd like to do both. Um, the second time you've hit the nail on the head. Um, so first of all, hoping that this passes in 2024, there's then a 4-year period where we're doing the education and working with the county clerks and the Secretary of State on implementation. So our organization, and I'm sure the coalition, will be very active and involved in the educational component. We want to make sure that the state and all the counties and the cities are able to roll this out in as smooth a fashion as possible. So I imagine and plan on being involved in that. Certainly, we'd love to see more efforts at proportional representation. And I think one of the greatest things about working in this coalition and seeing how this has progressed has been the younger activists who have embraced this and have become fluent experts in election reform. And as you pointed out, Chuck, and maybe I said, I've been working at this for an awfully long time. And once upon a time, I was one of those younger activists and not so young anymore. So it's really thrilling to see these younger folks out there and doing it. And I think that's one of the really important components that organizers have to understand and get involved with, and that's passing the torch. So I hope to keep doing this for as long as I can, but at the same time, hope to keep bringing in more people for whom it's actually more relevant because it's their future and their government. So that's a big component of this.
Yeah, I think I mean, that's exciting that you're involved in a coalition that does draw on young people, and we need young people to be civically engaged. The prospect of proportional representation is intriguing to me. It seems that it would be a relatively straightforward, I guess, constitutional amendment to convert the House from district into a kind of partisan focused voting. I mean, just briefly, what would that look like if one of the pieces of the House government or the state government completely converted to a proportional representation system?
So it could look something similar to what they're doing in Portland, just on a bigger scale. You could divide the state into districts and have several candidates represented from each district. That would be one way to do it. You could do something that's called party list proportional representation, where each party would put forward a list of candidates and seats would be awarded based on the percentage of vote received. So under that very theoretical notion, because I'm not sure that would fly, but just say for sake of theory, If the Democrats got 40% of the vote, they'd get 40% of the representation. If Republicans got 35%, they'd get 35%. But then that leaves 25% for the Greens, the Libertarians, Progressive Party, and parties that are currently excluded, but who clearly have representation in the state. They'd actually wind up being able to translate that representation into seats in the Oregon House. So I think the multi-member district is the one that is more likely. And while it may seem pretty far-fetched at the moment, I think that those of us who have seen in our lifetime things like same-sex marriage become legalized, so to speak, and cannabis legalization, things that once seemed pretty far-fetched are now somewhat taken for granted. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some very significant electoral reform happen, but it's not going to happen overnight.
And so this coalition, in all likelihood, may not dissolve. It might stay intact and continue to explore other reforms down the road. Is that conceivable?
It's conceivable. I mean, I also think that it could sort of just continue morphing in different ways. It likely will stay together in some fashion to make sure that the implementation of House Bill 2004 happens. But then beyond that, maybe organizations drop out, new ones join who are more focused on other specific electoral reforms. There's clearly an appetite for it. And one of the things that is encouraging is that not only are the younger activists younger, but there's a great diversity to this. So I think as we see more diverse groups get involved and understand what's at stake, we'll see just that diversity keep propelling the movement forward.
So my name's Chuck Fall, and I'm representing Green Perspectives. Conceivably then, Blair, and my guest is Blair Bobier with Oregon Ranked Choice Voting. We've been discussing the House Bill 2004, which is a referendum, a referral from the House, from the state government into our ballots, where we, the people, get to vote on this. I think a good task for Green Perspectives is to explore the electoral reforms. And I think it would be definitely good to have you back and continue this conversation. I'm especially interested in the proportional representation that is in the Green Party's basically platform as a point of ambition to democratize the electoral process. So there is more choice. Minorities do get represented, especially political minorities like the Greens. Blair, is there anything you want to leave us with? Any closing thought? Anything to be ready for? A promotion for the campaigning? You are going to be doing campaigning coming up for November. Just make a remark about what campaigning you anticipate and what a volunteer could approach and get involved.
Sure. So I'll plug the website again. That's OregonRCV.org. So OregonRCV.org. So people can go there now and sign up, and that will put them on our email list, which we're now sending out things not obnoxiously often, but with some regularity. So people can get informed, get involved. Donations, of course, are always welcome. But once we transition into the actual campaign infrastructure, then that's where the rubber hits the road. And I think one of the big components that we're going to be looking at in terms of grassroots outreach is for people to hold house parties and do things on a local basis. So again, OregonRCV.org, people will get plugged in. We'll find ways to connect you with others in your community, because it's going to be a community-based campaign. This is really something where people learn from their peers, from their neighbors, from their friends, from their family. So we'll have training for speakers and lots of house parties, taking it house to house and having a party.
Very exciting. My guest, Blair Bobier, Oregon Ranked Choice Voting, and I'm Chuck Fall with Green Perspectives. Thank you, Blair.
Thank you, Chuck.